what I'd like to do now is, on behalf of Kappa Delta Pi, I'd like to thank our presenter for sharing their time and expertise with us this evening. National Board Certified Mindy Kyriakides is a 15-year veteran of the classroom in both online and traditional environments. She, along with her former students, authored Transparent Teaching of Adolescence, Creating the Ideal Class for Students and Teachers, a conversation about best practices for high school teachers. She also runs an education blog for secondary teachers. Her fellow presenters for the session are former students and co-authors. At this point, I'll turn things over to our presenter for this evening, Mindy Kyriakides. Mindy, the screen and mic are all yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Well, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see everybody here. And I did want to let you know that if you are interested, we are working through Twitter on a hashtag unmuted KDP. If you want to interact with us on there, we're going to try to multitask and follow through on that, as well as working through here. I have with me Crystal and Anne. There she is from Chicago. I have Anne Marie from Fort Pierce, Florida, and I have there she is, and Stacy from Tampa, Florida. And all of us, hello, there she is, and all of us have worked together as in a very different capacity. But I was their teacher for a few years back, and we have now kind of moved forward, and some of them are teachers themselves. So I want to thank you for joining our conversation about using student feedback in high school classrooms. But before we actually move into the core of the discussion, I had to share this strategy that I found. Some of you might have seen it already if you opened up the slideshow. You know, when you find one of those rare gems you just have to share. Well, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But the person who came up with this idea, there we go.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. The person who came up with this idea is somebody who really, really understands where teenagers are coming from. And they have an excellent handle on teenagers. So well played, ninja teacher. Well played. Okay, let's get started. As teachers, we spend a huge chunk of classroom time trying to get students to be quiet and just listen to what we have to say. I mean, technically, we never really mute them because they'll still talk no matter what, pretty much. However, we do often mute out or perhaps maybe disregard their opinions. And I don't think it's because we don't care. I think it's because we feel we really don't have the time. The thinking is, I have to get through this lesson, I have to get through this lesson. And our focus today is to talk about what happens if we actually do take a few moments to listen to what they have to say. What if we systematically and purposefully involve students in the process of learning and teaching? What happens to the learning environment and our students' learning experiences and our curriculum? It's no easy trick, though, listening to teenagers. Not when we're working with the most skeptical, dubious, opinionated, distracted, goofy, self-absorbed group of people on the planet. But, you know, hey, that's their job, and like it or not, they are going to present us with their opinions about our teaching and the class, and most likely they're going to do so at the worst possible moment that they could. But how they express their thoughts and opinions and when they express them can be designed as part of their learning experience. The process of the design is comprised of three main steps. It's first, students developing sincere expectations of their teacher, plus the teacher actively asking students about the extent to which he or she has met or is meeting those expectations, and adjusting to feedback that they receive if needed. Plus, a final reflective meeting of the minds on an evaluation of everything, of the whole. And all of this adds up to a more positive, collaborative, productive learning environment. If the culture of your class is built on mutual expectations and active evaluation, then you can truly have a learner-centered environment that really engages teenagers. However, there are some colleagues and some critics who oppose the use of student feedback to accomplish this kind of environment. You have to expect that from time to time. Stanley Fish is a well-known opponent to the use of student evaluations at the post-secondary level. His argument is basically that young adults that just don't have the ability to properly evaluate their teachers or their learning. And we happen to disagree, our group. And now we know you're not going to take everything that students say and follow it, because you can't. But the idea is that you teach them how to evaluate you and how to evaluate your teaching and how to evaluate their learning. The underlying assumption is everyone's ideas have potential for something. Their idea alone or their feedback alone may not do the trick, but it may trigger an idea in someone else. So our Burger King colleague here conveys a misconception that many educators have on how authority and feedback link. Their logic is that if students are permitted to offer criticism of a teacher's practice, then somehow that's the same thing as giving the student authority over them. And not at all. We think that seeking and using feedback is a powerful way to enhance the authority of the educator as a facilitator of learning. So it actually does the opposite. It's not letting kids have their way. It is listening to their ideas before kindly dismissing them with sound reasons to do so, or compromising with them clearly and purposefully. It's not a power struggle. It is everyone working towards the same objective. Now, the first step of the process is having students develop sincere expectations of you. And Crystal's going to give us some insights into how having a teacher ask her students about their expectations of her impacted her learning experience. Go ahead, Crystal.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I would have to say having a teacher ask me that for the first time, it was very unsettling. I think students go through so much of their academic career being told what is expected, and suddenly for the first time in my young adult life, I was being asked, what do I expect of them? And it set the tone of the class for me immediately. I was faced with the question of, how do I want this class to go? And now, how do I tell her what I expect? It created an accountability to not just summarize last night's homework, but to actually think beyond a quick black and white answer. It made me dig deeper, and it made me think further, and that stayed with me. That's what resonated beyond the classroom.
You know, Crystal, I had a similar response during my first experience providing feedback and expectations of a teacher, and I was a bit intimidated, so that's good insight. First, thank you guys for joining us, and now that we have, you know, a bit of an idea about why we're doing all of this, let's get down to the logistics of how to take this step. And it's important that you do take this step at the beginning of the school year. In Miss K's class, this was usually done on the second day of school, and sometimes the third, depending on what kind of schedule we had that year. Nonetheless, the idea is to complete it before you begin the curriculum. Now, asking for student expectations, it's actually pretty fun because they don't expect it. They're inevitably surprised that their teacher wants to meet their expectations. It's a powerful message to them. I care about how well I teach you. The best time to open this discussion is after you have presented your expectations of them, because you can easily seg into something like, now that I've given you some of my expectations, I'd really like to hear what you expect of me in this course. We did it in 3 steps. In the first step, students paired up to discuss their best and worst teacher ever and why, as a means of introducing their partner. Students might say, This is Amy. Her best teacher was Mr. What's-His-Name, and her worst teacher was Miss What'd She Do? Because insert random reason here. This activity serves three purposes: building a sense of community in the class, and that students usually either shared the teacher or shared a similar experience. It also helps you remember student names, and it offers you a sense of what these students find to be best and worst practices. So from listening to their presentations, you're able to mentally check off what you already do and what you already don't do, and determine what you may need to think about or work on. And then we'd have students work in groups to determine their expectations of the teacher. However, this could easily be done as a homework exercise or a class opener, and then move to a group activity. The general idea is to get them to reach consensus on around 5 expectations that you may need to start out with more and whittle it down, see how it goes, and finally come together into a whole class discussion to determine alignment of expectations, rules, and consequences. And now you're actually going to have a harder time than you think getting students to really push the bar of expectations. Okay, your task at this point is to make sure you're taking the points that your students mention very seriously by noting every single one that is made either on the board or overhead so that everyone can see. Now, like this slide, there are several related themes repeated throughout. So even if you've heard the same thing in the class period before, your role is to treat the discussions with a fresh outlook each time, because students will inevitably come up with 2 overarching expectations. We want teachers to be nice, and we want the class to be fun. Well, since nice is such a vague word, you'll want to have them clarify what it means. If nothing else, you'll end up with a really great vocabulary lesson. Now, they'll hem and haw about fun, too, which can be just as tricky. Okay, this is where you guide students toward extending the definition of nice. It can be respectful and friendly, can add kind. It's also helpful to ask them why is it important to them. What difference does it really make? The larger question we can consider, too, is why? Why is that one of the first things students ask for? What has been their experience with adults thus far? Now, the fun expectation also deserves clear analysis with students, because you do not want to say you'll make learning fun. Not every day can or will be fun. So dig in there. What do they perceive as fun? Your goal is to guide them around to understanding that you can design curriculum to be interesting and engaging, and that you will, as much as possible, convey enthusiasm and joy for what you're doing. Remember, our behavior is just as crucial to the fun factor.
True, true. And I want to make a note here that I did have a colleague who attempted this endeavor, and it failed miserably. The whole class turned into an argument, and I think it failed for 2 reasons. First, she didn't take the students' opinions and thoughts seriously. She dismissed the ideas. Anything she perceived to be stupid, she just dismissed. And I can't stress enough that you've got to include everything as a possibility and slowly guide them to where you want them to go.
I just want to jump in here. I actually used this as an open activity this past year for the first week of school. My students came up with crazy things, like they wanted ice cream parties every Friday, and they wanted like 10 free days for the whole year, and that's just not something that's realistic. So I just wanted to point out how important it is that we do guide them. Eventually you will come up with a set number of good expectations, and what I did in my classroom is I had a poster. Half of it was for their expectations of me, the other half was my expectations for them, and we displayed it on the wall the whole year, and it was something that we were proud of that we did together. But very important, you have to guide them.
Oh, I love the poster idea. Love it, because it's tangible. It's something that you can refer to. Awesome.
Right.
And the guiding, I think, is kind of like Socrates. So if anybody's familiar with his dialogues, or if you're not, you might want to read one. But you'll see how his use of questioning moved students to what was really the best possible answer for everyone. And I think the second reason that this failed for my friend was that she negated or she argued the definition of the terms instead of guiding them. It would probably go something like this. She would say, well, by nice, don't you mean respectful? That's not guiding the students' thinking. That's telling them what to think. And this is tricky, but it's more that you want to probe them with questions such as, nice, yes, definitely, let me write that down, nice, yep, I think teachers should be nice too. But guys, how can I know that I'm being nice to you in a way that you expect me to be nice? I mean, you know, maybe my nice is different than yours, you know? That the ability to entertain students' thoughts, or at least seem to be entertaining their thoughts for the first time, is a crucial component in having this a successful expectations discussion.
You know, you're both absolutely right, and those were excellent examples. Thank you. Okay, so now we've set this foundation for a class where the teacher is receptive to feedback. And consider, too, that by doing so, the students will be a bit more receptive to feedback. So then your next step in this process is asking for feedback and criticism formatively, as well as you got to use it. So Stacy is going to tell us a little bit about her experience with learning and teaching using this approach to feedback.
Well, one thing that I started doing this year with my students was using the Post-it note strategy. I used it for many different reasons, so you're going to have to determine what your purpose is and what you want to use it for. It can be content specific, but again, it depends on your purpose. I really liked using Post-its because it was immediate, concrete information. It could range from, you know, what in this lesson was helpful, or what could I have done that would have made a difference? What did you like? What did you dislike about today's lesson? Or maybe what are you still confused about? It's all going to depend on what your wrap-up is at the time. You know, sometimes I did content area things like, you know, what in the video did they say was the first so-and-so? And that was just to get immediate feedback. Did my students get what I needed them to get? But you can use this as such an important tool in getting feedback for yourself as an educator. And if you're interested in this Post-it note strategy, I'm going to be posting a blog about it on our Transparent Teaching blogs. Make sure you check that out.
Awesome. Don't forget to switch over, Stace.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Stacy. And I think I'm actually really excited to see your Post-it note blog. I'm going to check it out as soon as you've got it posted. The slide that Stacy just brought up for us, there's something that's really striking about this image for me, and that it shows a conversation flowing both ways. It's not just the teacher talking at a student or the student talking at the teacher. And another really good thing to notice is that how the teacher interacts with each student is highly differentiated. You won't talk to Sally the way you talk to Billy. And each student is approached in a different way. And this is something to keep in mind as you get a feel for how to engage with your class in daily discourse. So this is the largest chunk of the process, as it takes up the entire school year. And there are several different times or reasons to engage in formative evaluation and take feedback from the students. It's a constant cycle of intake and use and intake and use, and the key is to do it actively and purposefully. For example, you might, at a critical moment in a presentation, ask the class to evaluate what is going on. And I think you'll know the moment when you see it. It's you have students sitting there with their eyes glazed over like big yummy donuts. And I think the best strategy is to avoid asking very general questions like, is everybody okay so far, or any questions? Ask them specific evaluative questions, which are more apt to get you a response. And this is something that we all know, whether you're a student or a teacher. Students love to give their opinions on your presentation. So they'll do it. And I think another good spot is maybe at the end of a lesson or the end of a unit. And I think a key thing to remember is that although teachers might be reflecting on things, the idea is to bring the students into those reflections with you. If nothing else, maybe noting a small block of time in your lesson plans, even if it's the last 2 minutes of the class, will hopefully help you develop the habit of reflecting with your students. You might also offer a preemptive point of evaluation before you even begin. And Anne-Marie has an example of kind of how she handled this.
I sure do. You know, preemptive evaluation, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And one example here, voice is extremely important for teachers. My voice, if you didn't notice, it's squeaky, and sometimes it changes quite a bit, even in the course of one single lecture or webinar, as the course may be. I used to dread, did you notice? I used to dread speaking in front of groups because I know it changes, and it inevitably invokes questions like, do you always sound like that? Or why does your voice do that? And so things like this, where you know you're going to have questions, are good places to throw in preemptive evaluations. It can be as straightforward as just letting your students know up front and then encouraging them to give you feedback when they notice it. So in my case, in the squeaky case, I might say, you know, my voice is a bit squeaky today, so if it gets to be too much, just let me know. I'll go drink some more water. So take these opportunities to see what your students know or how they respond to requests for feedback, and that'll give you an idea of where to go from there. And yes, I do have water, if you're wondering.
Squeaky case.
I think it's true, and I think, you know, sometimes we find ourselves, we get on a roll talking and then we forget to pace ourselves.
Yes.
So that's also something that I'm even keeping in mind for the webinar of take a breath and take a moment.
Me too. Me too.
Right? So there's one idea for gathering feedback from your students, and that's the use of minute papers. It's a quick way to get metacognitive feedback, and you could have students pose one question that they still have on a topic or a discussion, or you might even have them expand on a connection that they've made. And these quick writes offer you a ton of information on what students actually got from the lesson, which is important. These quick writes just get you a good bit of information and knowing where your students are with what they've actually been presented with. Another idea is to verbally discuss as the students are packing up their books and their book bags, because it will give them and you an opportunity to talk about the class's experience as a class and as a community.
Yeah, and I've got to add something on the packing up to go thing, because I know it drives some teachers crazy. And one thing I found is that you're considering the last few minutes of class as a time for reflection or feedback, and you're actually planning for it. This is what makes the difference. It's not off the cuff. It's planned reflection time. The students did two things. First, they'd either pack up more quietly because their friends were usually saying something kind of interesting, usually, or second, I was just less bothered by the whole thump, thump, zip, zip, you know, all that nonsense. And also, I didn't hold to the thinking that, oh, the bell doesn't dismiss you, I dismiss you thinking. It was actually more of a hassle for me to do that than it was for them. These are just some of my thoughts. I don't want to deviate too far, but Stacy did remind me the other day about the method that some administrators are using with teachers, which is bell-to-bell evaluation. And in those last few moments, using reflection on the lesson or the learning or the teaching is a valid way to close any lesson at the end.
All right, the second half, this step in the process, is using the feedback. And this is where our friend Stanley Fish has the biggest issue conceptually. And this is where teachers are probably going to differ the most. When to actually use student suggestions. Mm-hmm. The thing is, no matter how silly their idea is, you need to listen to it, and you'd better have a really good reason for not using it. Just saying, because that's the way it is, or that's the way I've planned it, or it's on the test, won't cut it. Listen and entertain the thought, or at least look like you are. If the idea is really silly, like my class wanting ice cream parties on Fridays, the class is going to respond. They will either giggle or verbally comment on it with, yeah, right. An example might be you've diligently planned for students to work on a short story. However, they make the suggestion, can we work in groups? This is one suggestion you're going to get a gazillion times. Students really just want to feel free to talk. First, make sure you have a darn good reason for this assignment to be an individual one. Secondly, entertain the suggestion. And third, compromise and or dismiss regretfully. You might say, I hadn't thought of that, and then pause. You're pausing here because more than likely some other student will pipe up with a reason, why not, before you do. While you're considering, students are most likely already working too, by the way. Say, I do want you to have your own individual story, but I don't mind if you consult a partner for some feedback. This compromise keeps the objective clear, but still conveys that you are listening and using feedback. Of course, you may have to say no to a suggestion, but with solid reasons and truly regretful tone, you're on much better footing. You can always tell the student, you know what, I like that idea. So the next time we're, going to do that, remind me to do it. Other times, you might find the suggestion warrants changing an approach by following the student's idea, which you'll want to do at least a few times throughout the year. Stating why you're agreeing to it will also help. Yes, that will work better because good idea. Let's do it.
Yeah, definitely. And it happens. I mean, you'll have these suggestions throughout the year, and you will know when it's right. Definitely. It's also important to keep in mind that whether you're saying no or you're compromising or you're using the suggestion, that you're doing what is best for the student's learning outcomes. And I think what this principal had to say really puts it into perspective. When students know that the teacher honestly wants their help, not just at the end of the semester, but to help the class learn better every day, then they will be more willing to not only give advice, but to also take it from the teacher. This is a sort of mutual trust. With such a level of trust, the teacher can push the students to perform at higher levels that would never have been possible otherwise. And I think that this mutual trust is really at the core of it. The final step is summative evaluation and reflection with students as you close out the school year. You began with your expectations. You went through the school year and took some of their suggestions and worked through everything together. And this last step is more important than you might think. Anne-Marie's going to tell us how it impacted her learning experience.
It did. It really did. And as I said earlier, I was initially intimidated by the whole feedback process. But Ms. K built a culture of feedback. She taught us how to critically analyze and respond. And I did eventually become comfortable with it. And at the end of the year, we had a final project to do on any aspect of theater that we chose. And while they covered just about every standard in the book, and they looked great on paper and posters and display boards, it was beyond boring. And we were, sorry, Ms. K, we were pretty bummed that we did not get to participate in the end-of-year performances. Fortunately, we actually had a place to voice that opinion, the end-of-year evaluation. Now, I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of Drama 1 students that year voiced a recommendation to change that final project because subsequent Drama 1 classes were able to put on one-act performances for their final project. Now, actually seeing this process work was inspiring. Knowing that the teacher had made changes based on our evaluation results gave me confidence in my decision-making. My opinion mattered. It was so cool. I can't tell you how cool that was as a high school student. And I think that actually one of the biggest ideas I took away from that whole experience is that while it's so important for teachers to provide feedback to students, it's equally important that we listen to students.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. And I was actually one of the students who received the benefits of what Anne-Marie's class had done that previous year. Of course, at the time, we had no idea that what we were doing in class, our performances at the end of the year, was a direct result of Anne-Marie's class's experience and feedback. Looking back now with this knowledge, I think it's interesting that what one class said could mean a whole change in a lesson, a unit, a project, or even a semester. And of course, I'm glad we didn't have to do that boring project Anne-Marie was just referring to. But what's most valuable here is that by laying the foundation at the beginning of the school year, continuing to seek feedback throughout the year, and then at the end, as a teacher, what you receive is organic and thoughtful. Your students have learned how to think about their learning as well as your teaching. That's why this final step can really make the difference in how willingly your students will take part in this kind of learning experience. All right, so of all the steps, this one is probably the most familiar. We've completed evaluations of professors in college, and we're evaluated as teachers by administration, mentors, on a sense of the whole of the class or practice. The difference is going to be what we're not going to, the difference is that we're not going to use numbers or bubbles. I mean, do we really need to bubble anymore? Instead, we're going to use some narrative feedback, in-depth feedback. You can work from a template which we've sent to you in your packet along with the slides, but the idea is to really dig for information. You may want to make the information specific to the course. For example, now that we've studied up through the Cold War, which unit do you think I might need to emphasize more strongly? Why? Most importantly, you'll want to find out how well you've met the student expectations. You must revisit them and get specific examples from the students on what you're doing well and what you need to work on. One question we've always had was on the topic of classroom management. How well did I meet your expectations of classroom management? For example, organization of paperwork and consistency of procedures. You may even want to use your current teacher evaluation form and repurpose it in student-friendly language. Consider that the majority of your performance evaluation has to do with what you do with and for your students. A final tip is to keep or print out the forms, making them anonymous if students have inadvertently put their names on the forms, and have them out on a table at open house. Imagine the reactions of parents and new students reading what former students think of their coursework and teacher. It really does send a powerful message.
It does, definitely. And also, it gives them something to do while they're waiting to talk to you, if you have something for them to look through. And I always found that helpful and conversation starter. So as we close out the discussion, I just want to share another tidbit about a colleague who decided to use this final summative evaluation step. She had not done anything else throughout the entire year. She just thought, oh, okay, I'll do this end of the year thing and find out. So she typed up a few questions and handed them out. However, she wasn't prepared for the responses. Now, she was, as you can imagine, a little upset and demoralized. I mean, she felt that all of her hard work had gone unappreciated. And she did have a few positive points of feedback coming through on the forms, but she couldn't even see them through all the negative ones. And I give you this example not to scare you, but to help you understand the importance of doing all of the steps, not just one. This is a good idea, asking students of an end-of-year evaluation, but if you haven't done it consistently and you haven't created this environment and mutual trust, it's probably going to be somewhat negative. Laying the foundations of expectations and following through with that culture of evaluation is the only way to get authentic responses here. Of course, my friend didn't suck as a teacher. However, her students did not know how to express what she needed to do to improve, nor had she consistently and systematically asked them to tell her. So they were stuck with sucks as a catch-all phrase. They just didn't have anything else to pull from. Your students will, by the time you reach this point, provide you with specific ideas and suggestions, which is what you want. You're going to have a pretty good idea where you stand anyway before you even get to this point, because you will have continuously sought feedback. Now, in the example with Anne-Marie and the end-of-year project, they didn't tell me, oh, this project sucks. They said, you know, this is a lot of work, and we know that we learned something from it, but we really found it boring. And that's the kind of stuff I needed to hear from them. Then they suggested, why don't you let us do our own play? But at their level, I was thinking, oh my goodness, they're only little baby drama ones. You know, they can't do an entire play. And they said, well, maybe a short one. So we worked together from there. It was the last couple of days, I think, Emery, we took a whole class period, I think, to...
You know what, it was a great experience, though. The project was great as far as academically.
Yes,
but
it was.
Working through that process together.
I stand by those 25 standards that were on that project.
It was good. But working through that process together is what made it work and really come together.
Yes.
And, yeah, it did take a good class period or two.
If not more, yeah. If not more.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. So I also present this example to help you understand that you do kind of need to prepare for the inevitable, this sucks, because it will. I mean, they will somewhere put it. It will be there, I promise, somewhere. Students are not going to like everything you do, and they are going to offer negative criticism of you. So you'll want to prepare yourself emotionally for this. And the best way to handle the inevitable negative criticism that you're going to receive is to try to mine whatever nugget of wisdom you might receive from it. It's scary, of course. You can't change what others do or say, but you can make sure that you're prepared to receive it. It's going to come. You know, don't fear it. Embrace it. And by the way, not seeking feedback doesn't mean you won't be criticized. Let me say that again in a different way. Not asking for it doesn't mean you won't get it. For example, the recent issue in Duncanville with student Jeff Bliss is an example of negative criticism, albeit unsolicited. He's angry, but what he actually has to say is pretty powerful. If you don't purposefully seek feedback, you're probably going to receive it in this kind of form of a rant like Jeff Bliss had, or even a class mutiny. I had that too. But you are going to get it somewhere. Jeff's teacher didn't do anything wrong, but it's pretty obvious that she didn't cultivate an environment where students felt comfortable sharing their ideas with her. If she had, more than likely, this experience would have been an authentic, teachable moment, or a time for them to work together, as opposed to what it was, a viral mess, really. If we want students to be creative and innovative, then we must develop an environment that allows them to be that way every day.